Hello and welcome to the Coaching Podcast, Coaching for Success in Sport and Business. Your host is Emma Doyle, the energy and high performance under pressure coach who is a world leader in unleashing human potential. Buckle up for this high octane session. Let 'em have it, Coach.
G'day everybody, Coach M here. We are on the Coaching Podcast, as you all very well know, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. AJ Lauer, who is a leadership coach with over 2 decades of experience in diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI. Such important work. 10 plus years developing the future of science and technology workforce, multiple publications on DE&I in STEM. She's a leading expert on workforce development in science and technology fields, as well as an author and obviously an executive coach. And her book is very much focuses on imposter syndrome. So I can't wait to talk to you about that. So first of all, AJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
All right, let's go straight into our pattern break question. And if DE&I was an animal, which one would it be?
I think DE&I would be a hedgehog. Because when you look at it on the outside, it can look spiky. It can look a little bit intimidating. You're like, ooh, I don't know if I want to touch that. However, hedgehogs, when they're properly socialized, can be cuddly little creatures, and they can be really nice to have around. And so I think that equity and inclusion has this very spiky reputation, and people get nervous about touching it. But when it's done right and when it is, properly socialized, properly handled, it is something that is so beneficial to everyone who encounters it that is really something that we should all be pursuing.
All right, let's just go there straight away. I always say the fish rots from the head down. Not a great. I mean, staying on the animal theme for a moment. Let's just take each word. Okay, let's demystify each word. I'd love your take on. Let's go with diversity first. And one practical tip that people could apply into the workplace straight away. So let's take the word diversity. What does it mean to you?
Diversity is the numbers. It is who is in the room. So if you want a practical tip, it would just be to pay attention to who is in the room. Take a moment and look around. Who is there? Who is not there?
That's exactly what I'm after with each word. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's equity.
So equity is the practice of making sure that everyone has what they need in order to be successful. Equity and equality get confused. Equity is making sure everybody has what they need. Equality is making sure everybody has the same thing. And we talk about equity because what I need to be successful may not be the same thing that you need to be successful. I broke my ankle this summer. I have my leg up on a chair over here. To be successful today at work, I need to have my leg up on a chair. For you, that might be like, why would I do that? So for equity purposes, providing me with a chair so that I can keep my foot up is the right thing to do.
And inclusion.
Inclusion is what happens when people actually feel like they are valued and seen in the space. So it's not just, are there a bunch of different people in the room? Can I see someone in the room who looks like me? Do I have what I need to be successful? But it's more of that social feeling of, if I bring myself into this room, if I bring my ideas, will they be heard? Will I be respected? Do I feel completely included into the team? And one thing to do to check that would just be to look around at anything that you are planning. Events are really easy, not easy, but a place that lend themselves to paying attention to this. Is there anything with your event that is excluding someone? Is your facility accessible to everyone? Are you providing translation or interpretation for people who need it? Did you ask about food allergies? Is there a lactation room? All of that good stuff.
Yep. A good friend of mine just wrote a book, Leadership, called Leadership is Not Leadership. And one of the key distinctions that I love within his book by Charles Harbin is that the distinction between management, which in many ways in what I heard under equity is the equality piece. So the manager is making sure that we all have the equal number of rostered days off or holiday pay, etc. And leadership, which to me is coaching, is the equity piece, the understanding who's in front of us so that we can bring out their best. The simplicity of that, it was like management's about processes and leadership's about people. And that was a really great distinction just in my own map of the world as it relates to, I mean, all of the concepts, but especially equity. Why does this stuff matter?
Well, the research shows that when people feel included, they are much more likely to speak up. They are going to bring their best ideas to the table. There's quite a bit of research that shows that people who are in diverse teams perform better because when we are in teams of people who look exactly like us, we assume that everybody is thinking the same thing that we are. And so we don't raise questions. Even having one person with a different background in the room can open up the conversation to different topics. However, you can't just do the diversity part because that one person who's in the room who looks different than everyone else might be changing the minds of everybody else, but they may feel completely squashed. So that's why the inclusion part is so important. Not only do we have different people in the room, but everyone who is in the room can bring their best ideas. They can challenge the ideas that are floating around in the room, and they can drive everyone around them to be more successful.
All right, so let's talk about hiring. You've got a number of candidates, you've got a diverse number of candidates. Perhaps then the numbers piece is skew-if within a company. What are your best tips around hiring?
Oh, we could do an entire podcast about hiring. There's so much that goes into it. Let me tell you a story. So I was in a hiring process once, and this was a while ago, so I was a young-ish white woman in the interview process. When we were doing an interview, it was me and a bunch of other young-ish and middle-aged white women in the room. We interviewed two people in person. One was a young-ish white presenting woman. The other was an older gentleman with Hispanic heritage. And he was nervous during his entire interview. However, he brought in hard data about what an incredible professional he was. When we asked him questions about programs he had done, he pulled out a binder and said, let me show you. These are the advertisements I did. These are the post-survey results. I mean, he was incredible. He was a little nervous, but it was so clear that he knew what he was doing. In the hiring process, after the interviews, every single person in the room said that we should hire the young woman. And I was sitting there and I was like, were we sitting in the same interview? This guy was so much more qualified. He clearly knows his stuff. He has priorities that align with the organization. I mean, the young woman is fine, but this gentleman was incredible. But we didn't have any processes in place to make sure that we weren't letting our own biases, this person looks familiar and I could see her fitting into this group of all white women at the table. So because we didn't talk about that and we didn't make sure that we were not allowing that bias into the room, we almost hired the younger woman. Now, this interview was almost 10 years ago at this point, probably 9 years ago. We did end up hiring the gentleman because I intervened up a couple of levels because of the bias that I was seeing. He is still there, and he has done absolutely incredible work while he has been there. With hiring, so much of it comes down to making sure that we are not just looking for people who are just like us.
We all have these subconscious biases, and we know no other. Obviously, bringing them to our conscious awareness is step one. Correct me if I'm wrong. What's step two?
Step two is, well, it's actually a few steps before step one. So step two is we need to make sure that we know how to communicate when we see a bias happening, so that when we notice it in ourselves or we notice it in the room, we know how to step up and say, hold on a second, we need to pause.
Any other tips around that? Because language matters, and plenty of times people can say things abruptly that then really triggers a bunch of other stuff as well. So are there any ways, like just a conversation framework around how we bring that up in a way with, love and kindness in our heart, yet we're heightening awareness?
Of course. So there is a really fantastic framework called the Difficult Conversations Framework. What this does is it pulls people together in their common goals and also pulls a little bit of the emotion out of it. I also find that because it's a framework, you sit down and you write down on a note card, these are the things I'm going to say, and it helps you get it out. So the way that it works is I have noticed that, and you present the facts. So in my situation, I have noticed that the male candidate brought in ample proof of all the incredible things that he had done. He clearly has experience in driving the outcomes that we're looking for in the organization. I also noticed that everyone in the room, when we were interviewing, looked just like the white woman, right? This made me feel, is the next prompt, as though there might have been some bias that entered into our hiring decision. And then you move into, if you know what the person's common beliefs are that you share, you can say, I know that we all really want to hire the best person for this role. And I'm a little bit I feel a little bit like I'm concerned that the decision that we're making isn't going in that direction. And the final thing that you say is, what do I need us to do? So what I need us to do is to pause and reflect and make sure that there is no bias entering into this hiring decision that we're about to make. And then you can say, what do you think about that? Can we have a conversation about it?
So simple. And, just to the audience listening to this, just don't underestimate the power of a conversation framework. It helps. It just, whether you need to write it down, or the more we can get used to having these conversations, the easier they become. And this is someone who used to avoid conflict frequently. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Really, really appreciate it. All right, let's go next with what would you say are the biggest leadership blind spots you've seen when it comes to creating a truly inclusive culture?
Well, I think it kind of gets back to your point earlier about managing versus leading. So many of us are taught that leadership looks like management. Leadership looks like we're lining up all the ducks in the row, we have our goal, we're going to hit the goal, and that's what we're doing. Versus leadership, which is managing the people, providing the people that you are working with what they need to be successful. And that gets into that equity piece again, too.
Love it. Where does your passion for STEM and creating, these workforces in the science and technology fields come from? Talk to me about little AJ.
Little AJ. I have always liked hanging out with geeks. My older brother has a computing science degree. All of his friends were really geeky, and I was definitely that tag-along little sister for years there. And so I would hang out with all of his nerdy friends and kind of absorb what they were talking about. And then, you get into college and everybody's a geek about something, which I just thought was magical. Professionally, I worked for a couple of years at an engineering college. And there, I really fell in love with, especially the women on campus who were fighting their way through these incredibly difficult courses. They were often the only woman in the room. I had one student who was a trans student and would talk about the difference in his experiences when he was a woman in the room versus when he was perceived as being a man in the room. And I just, during those 3 years of developing these students and seeing them grow and seeing the impact, even as students, that they were able to have on science and technology and engineering, kind of fell in love with that. The idea that we could influence the world through influencing the people who are building the science and tech that we all rely on today.
Mm. I have the absolute honor and pleasure of leading the National Tooling and Machining Association Emerging Leaders Program. This is the second year I've been doing it, and we're about to conclude our 9 months together in Detroit in October. And I feel like, they're my little family that we've all sort of grown together in 2025. One thing that they talk about is the recruitment process being quite difficult in relation to a lot of manufacturing companies not being remote or hybrid. You are in the room, you are making a difference. What are your thoughts on how do we attract more STEM orientated folk into these types of roles?
That's tricky, right? Because so many science and tech roles are remote at this point.
Correct. What have you got for my manufacturing emerging leaders?
For your manufacturing folks.
Come on, Dr. AJ, I know you got something in there.
If there's any consideration for any of the work being able to be done remotely, I think that's huge. I think making sure that if you are pulling people into spaces that they are inclusive, honestly, tech has a lot of money, obviously, a lot. And so people are able to get the meals with their allergies handled that they need to when they're in the cafeteria, and they're able to get prayer spaces and lactation spaces, and all of those kinds of things are there. And so within whatever capability that the manufacturing companies have, if you can make sure that the spaces you're creating are as inclusive as possible, to maybe not emulate what tech is doing, but at least provide some familiarity, I think that will not only help you bring in more folks who are from STEM, but also bring in more diverse individuals into your spaces.
And then, of course, once they're there, making sure that they're valued and seen, and that their opinion matters, to that respected and belonging piece. All right, let's get on to your favorite topic, imposter syndrome. So congratulations on your book that came out earlier this year. Your book is called My Monster Mungo, a story about imposter syndrome. What I like about it is it's an illustration adult book. So that's the first thing that appeals to the different ways that we learn as well. So we're not, even though you've got your doctoral degree, it is something that we can consume in a story format. Let's talk first about the book. How did it come about?
So the imposter monster part of it came about through a conversation with a friend of mine named Katie, who we also cast as the main character of the book. She was kind enough to lend her appearance as the main character. We were chatting one day and she said something about, when we were in this meeting and all of a sudden my imposter monster showed up and, whatever. And after she finished her story, I said, tell me about this imposter monster thing. And she said, well, I don't like the way that we talk about imposter syndrome. It doesn't feel to me like I'm sick or like I have an illness or like there's something wrong with me, because typically when I feel like an imposter, it's because of the situation that I'm in. And she said, calling it a monster also is just a little catchier. It takes the syndrome part out. That's what she was thinking. And so I said, Katie, do you know how brilliant that is from like a psychological perspective? And she said, no, I just did it because it was cute. And I was like, cool, let me tell you a little bit about psychology. And so I explained to her how incredibly smart it was to take this imposter feeling and personify it and interact with it as a monster, as a creature that she could actually talk to and have a conversation with. And I get into all of this in the book, but that conversation led to starting to do some presentations, seeing how people were reacting. I found an illustrator who initially drew my monster borscht. If you can see just behind me, if this ends up being a video, I've got a cute little stuffed animal borscht on my shelf behind me. And then I did a presentation at something called Disrupt HR. And Disrupt HR is this incredible format where people get up and give 5-minute talks about a topic. It's an evening event, and so I decided that I wanted to tell a bedtime story about these imposter monsters. And again, as kind of a test, let's see how people react to this. And people loved it. Loved it. I got mobbed at the end. And so I said, okay, that was a great proof of concept. We're going to do this. And so the book is, because I only had 5 minutes for that talk, and in a book you have a lot more space. The book is a lot longer than the original talk was, and the format, the story is a little different, but that was kind of the process of getting from just a lunchtime conversation to...
Yeah. I think imposter syndrome shows up differently for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you coach leaders to recognize their own mungo, shall we say, and stop it from driving the bus?
First, typically there are some keywords that I listen for when I'm coaching someone to pick up on those imposter feelings. So it's, I don't feel worthy of whatever. They're going to figure out that I'm a phony, that I'm not good enough for this, and they're going to take away whatever role, privilege, award, prestige that they have received. Those kinds of words kind of ping I wonder if you're having imposter feelings. And so what I have folks do is walk through the 5 major types of imposter feelings. And then, I walk them through it and I say, which one of these made sense to you? Okay, now what I want you to do is to hear the voice in your head that told you that you would not be good enough if you weren't perfect, that you were not good enough if you weren't juggling all of the balls for everybody, and that if you dropped one tiny ball, the world would end. And then we take that voice in their head and we picture it as a creature, a monster. For some people, it's a blob. For some people, I had a client for whom it looked like Uncle Fester. For some people, it's a cute furry thing. For some people, it's very spiky. It depends on who you are, what your experiences are, what's going on for you. And then we start interacting with their monster.
I have to tell you that I've had a lot of success in chapter 1 of my life with athletes. Getting them to draw their mind monster was where we sort of started through a woman I met at a conference in Switzerland who was working with athletes in this space. And kids are still got that creative as well, that creative side that they really love the process. And I think as adults, it's so important to do the process as well. Can I ask the 5 imposter syndrome, what's the wording, traits, or what?
The 5 types of
The
imposters.
types, beg your pardon?
Yeah, and these come from Dr. Valerie Young's research. She has some incredible work on imposter syndrome. So she has the perfectionist, so the person who, if they're not perfect, they feel shame at the imperfection. The expert, which is like the knowledge version of the perfectionist. If I don't know everything, I'm ashamed. The soloist, which is the person who has to do everything on their own. The superhero, which is the person who has to keep a lot of balls up in the air. The natural genius. And the natural genius is the person who focuses on the ease and the speed of their accomplishments. So if they can't do it on the first try, it's an epic failure.
And the other piece, going back to when I used to do this with kids, one of my favorite questions was to say, okay, once you identify the my monster or the imposter monster, what's the positive intent?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
where real transformation happens. Is that share more of your experience on
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
Yes. I often will ask people, what is their positive intent or what are they protecting you from? So I mentioned that there's quite a bit of psychology behind the imposter monster concept, and that comes from something called parts work. And parts work recognizes that we all have different parts within us that show up at different times to serve different functions. So you may have a really competitive part that shows up when you're in the middle of a game. You may have a very caring part that shows up when you're around your family. There might be part of you that just wants to cuddle up on the couch. Right? And so all of these different parts of you that show up at different times serve different functions for you. And so if we can think about our imposter feelings as a part of us that shows up for a certain reason, that they're trying to protect us from shame. So we know from Brene Brown's research that shame is the emotion that human beings will do anything we can to not feel it. And so if we think of our imposter monsters as trying to prevent us from feeling shame about something, we can understand them not as just this scary thing that makes you feel small and tells you not to get up on that stage, not to go to the competition, not to accept the award, but rather it's a protective part that's showing up to try to prevent shame in your life. And that for most people is just mind-blowing. And it's just such an incredible honor to get to guide people through that process.
Absolutely. All right. Our guiding question is in 1 to a maximum of 3 words. What do you think makes a great coach?
Asking good questions. Do I get to expound or do I just get to
Yeah. I was going to go on, give us your top awesome questions.
So one favorite is just, and what else? Because that helps people drive deeper into whatever it is that they're thinking about.
Yep. I love that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The awesome question. It's a great way to remember it all. And what else? Mm-hmm. It's amazing how many times we jump in the space when people just haven't finished their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Less is more. Did that come naturally to you as a coach or did you have to work on it?
I've always been very interested in people. When I was younger, grade school, middle school, I did a lot of the talking. Like I was always very intense in my social interactions just because I was like so jazzed to be hanging out with people. But throughout kind of that high school and adulthood, as I mellowed a little bit, the listening became a little bit more intuitive. And by the time I was learning coaching skills, it was like, oh, okay, this is, like you said, it's a framework for doing something really great. So I think if I had tried to learn it when I was younger, it would not have gone well.
People that receive awards and this is maybe a subtle gender difference here, I guess is where I'm going. Guy gets an award, super, yeah, got this great award. Female gets it, not really that deserving of this, or putting themselves down, but sort of accepting it as a second-hand gesture. What's your advice, especially to women out there, in relation to owning their space?
You talk a lot about athletes. I really loved the moment when Ilana Maher, and she played on the US rugby team at the Olympics. Someone asked her if she felt like an imposter for receiving some award or for being the top in her profession. And she looked at the journalist and said, no, I've worked my butt off to get here. I totally deserve this. And I wish we had more women who were able to respond the way that she did. It is very easy to find all sorts of women who have responded in that more humble way that we are societally told we're supposed to, show humility. Tina Fey, Maya Angelou, Michelle Obama, you can find quotes from them talking about how they felt like imposters. And I think those are three, I don't think anybody would question that those are three incredible women in this world. So as far as owning your space, maybe find that video of Alana and just watch it. If you know you're about to receive an award, watch that and channel her. She's a powerful woman. And so we can share the link to that in the show notes for sure. It's phenomenal.
Fantastic. I look forward to watching that and listening, and may we all step into our own space. And finally, what about companies that are getting rid of their DE&I awareness program, part of their business, don't need it anymore, not important, not relevant, not going to make me more money? What's your final, we're in the world is subtly changing all the time, and I'd love for you to land this episode and tell us why we need it.
So a lot of companies are rebranding rather than totally getting rid of it. I think that there is some misconception out there that it is completely gone.
Great.
I know a lot of entrepreneurs in the DEI space who are seeing a huge uptick in their business. So I do want to say, don't get disheartened, because I don't think it's as bad as it looks like it is, as bad as the news is making it out to be. It's just changing face a little bit. However, for those companies out there who have completely eliminated it, shame on you, because it will only hurt your people. It will hurt your bottom line. It hurts the culture in the world, in our country, wherever you are.
Let's be honest. What does this next generation of workforce look like? It looks like DE&I. I mean,
Yes,
you
it does.
defined each word at the start, and this is why they are working. They want these things. It's beyond the paycheck. They're looking for these things. They're looking for coaching, a coaching culture. All right. So on the positive note, what does a coaching culture mean to you?
Coaching culture means that we are embracing speed bumps as learning opportunities. Rather than blaming someone for making a mistake, we ask a great open-ended question and further everyone on the team's learning.
All right. Well, you've heard it from Dr. AJ. Embrace those speed humps, have those difficult conversations, and be aware that the imposter syndrome or the imposter monster lives within all of us. Identify it, bring that self-awareness, pick up on your keywords, whether you're self-coaching or coaching others, so that you can ask, what is that powerful intent of those my monsters, those parts that live within all of us? Dr. AJ, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure spending my diverse time with equity, equality, and of course inclusion with you. Thank you for the great work you do in, especially in the science space, bringing your research into practical coaching tools.
Thanks, Em. It's been really lovely to chat with you too.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the show, AJ, and shout out, of course, to Coach Jem B, who introduced us. We appreciate all the great work that she does in this space and empowering women to be their best possible selves. So thank you, Coach Jem B out there for making connections really, really important. And thanks everyone for listening.
The Coaching Podcast is sponsored by Transition Coach for Athletes, a global coaching, mentoring, and US college sporting scholarship placement service. The service helps athletes navigate the often challenging world of choosing your best college fit while maximizing sports performance. Visit www.transitioncoachforathletes.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating review on your podcast listening device.